東京から世界へ我々はTenguSecです。
Welcome to TenguCast episode 1. This is our first episode and hopefully a long-going series of wonderful updates we have for you beautiful people. As I said before, I'm Cicada, the founder of TenguSec, and I'm here with my co-host
James Miller, director of the Japan Institute for Cyberspace Studies. Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah, we're very excited to be here. Okay, so we've got a number of stories for you today. Our first story is, of course, the undersea cable cut that happened in the Baltic Sea in the last couple of weeks. There was a Chinese vessel that apparently had a Russian captain that was discovered to be dragging an anchor in the Baltic Sea and damaged several underseas internet cables. It's not a good thing.
And highlights, the general risk around not focusing on critical infrastructure. If we ignore things like undersea cables, satellite links, terrestrial links, those are all points that are fundamental to how every computing system ultimately is working. Any interconnected system is going to rely on those undersea cables for authentication and all sorts of authorization and auditing functions. The data planes are carrying critical information across borders. You can't have data free flow with trust without, a flow. Really pretty concerning news, I think.
Absolutely.
And it's certainly been a topic, people have been focused on for a while, but securing those cables, it kind of just makes me, even more uncomfortable about, fundamental shipping routes, the gaps that we're seeing with who actually is going to, handle security issues in maritime sort of domain. Malachi Straits is 80% of all of the traffic, import and export sort of traffic globally passes through that pipe.
Right through it, yeah.
Right through it. And then, how much information is passing over undersea cables coming in and out of Japan? A lot. So definitely that intersection between, sort of the hard security space and cyber.
It's a big deal because, as you said, these cables, they run everywhere, they run everything, and there's not really a whole lot that can be done. Once one is severed, you've got to dredge it up to the surface, splice it back, and put it back down, and just kind of hope it doesn't happen again. And right now, the best strategy anybody can come up with is, just have more cables. The sources in the European Union recently have called out over 100 incidents across Europe that they've attributed to Russian sabotage, and these would go from arson to any number of suspicious incidents, and this cable incident could definitely qualify as one of those. And, in this modern era, a lot of countries are trying to seek geopolitical means without direct conflict, so there's a sort of shadow war going on, and this could be related to that. This could just be an idiot captain who decided to drag his anchor. We'll probably never know, but it's important to have contingencies for these types of things. And Japan is actually moving towards finally implementing an active cyber defense bill. It was originally supposed to come out by the end of this year, but because of the fun election chaos, what do we think? Probably sometime next year?
Well, the Diet opens in January. A lot of bills that come in to the Diet early might be, appropriations or funding budget-related bills, and then, there'll be a series of other bills that, will, come through the Diet through the rest of the opening sessions. Usually, though, the Diet's going to close around June, so you're looking at about 6 months of legislative activity. Hopefully, we see a lot of the discussions around the risk and rewards for active cyber defense, and maybe a little bit discussion around Japan's role in global cybersecurity.
And absolutely, yeah. And a lot of powers in the region look to Japan as sort of the big brother when it comes to a lot of these things, defense, economic, and cyber. And Japan, despite having absolutely fantastic world-class hardware, easily the world leader on most industrial hardware applications, they lag a little bit on the software side. As anyone who has lived here for any amount of time will tell you, processes and software are just not the strong suit, and unfortunately that's where the vast majority of cyber operations are taking place these days. So it leaves them in a sort of sitting duck position. But there's also the, as it's called, the cult of offense, where countries tend to try to focus on building a hackback and a counteroffensive strategy before they've really locked down their whole thing. And, they don't have robust defensive strategies. So hopefully this bill accounts for that.
And to playing on Japan's strengths, if you think about what that hardware element plays in sort of the active versus the defensive cyber operations, hardware that's predictable, that functions according to specs, is fairly resilient against power fluctuations, sort of at the 12 volt DC sort of layer. Those are all really strong suits for Japan's hardware space, and it does improve the potential for cybersecurity baselines, because if the hardware is functioning predictably and reliably, that can help improve the resiliency of the overall system. But that does require a stack that then is able to take information and collect it securely, process it, and take those sort of insights and translate them to action. So there's certainly a lot to talk about in that scope of how active cyber intersects with hardware, I think.
Absolutely. And, even if you're building an offensive capability, but especially for a defensive capability, logging and the ability to see what's actually happening, both for, legal audit purposes, but also for forensic reconstruction down the road, is super important. And it seems that Cloudflare recently had an incident where for about a 3.5 hour window, they lost 55% of all their logs. Now, there's no telling what happened during that time. These logs are just gone. We haven't really heard a lot about why this happened, but that's not a good thing, right?
Cloudflare, it has a lot of really great technology, great set of services, but it sort of tees up this trust concern, resiliency concern around redundancy. If you have a single provider that you're relying on for all of your logging, you have to think about how that might affect your operations if things do fail. How do you recover? If you have an environment that's instrumenting deeper across the edge, is capturing information, and at least there's a way that that kind of information is stored and processed in more of a distributed way, it seems to me that this kind of tees up the discussion about how the evolution of cloud is trending more towards a hybrid model in some cases, something closer to edge to cloud, maybe in architecture and design. I don't know. How do you deal with those sort of mitigation concerns, do you think?
Yeah, the biggest thing about that is, if you have all of your logging and all of your processes centralized in data centers and not much is happening, at the endpoint, at the edge, then, you're kind of at the mercy of the state of these data centers. And if something happens to them, like most systems these days don't have the ability to fail over to a local alternative. And a hybrid system really would be a way forward for this.
It's also, I think, back to the hardware point, a continuing sort of question around how you can enable, better OT security through better logging. Just being able to instrument and capture more information at the edge, that's obviously a challenge. A lot of systems, are not designed to provide a lot of highly granular logging capability. Certainly there's, systems that are really, really great, and then some are maybe a little bit more challenging. But if you're going deeper into the edge, and if you will, the data collection and processing is closer at the edge, certainly, there's maybe the opportunity to provide a more resilient approach, more redundant approach across the if you will, the edge into the cloud side.
Absolutely. I think it's there's a lot of space for growth in that area. And, those who come forward and make something that actually works for that, they're going to clean up, honestly, from a business perspective, but also it's going to make things a lot more secure. So recently it has come to light that ExxonMobil got in a little bit of trouble for targeting environmental activists. Apparently they were hiring black hats to do hack and smear campaigns, just dig up any dirt they can on these people, hack their phones, do what have you, and try to just, push the activists out of the spotlight a little bit. And, this really highlights this sort of hybrid nature of how cyber and physical activism, espionage, everything has really sort of converged and will continue to converge in the future.
I think my recollection from the article in Reuters was that this is under FBI investigation, so the public and legal repercussions for these kinds of strategies, are certainly a topic that we might see more discussion and debate on.
100%. And, as these types of things will undoubtedly happen and continue to happen and grow, the ethical considerations around that become an issue, especially sort of harkening back to the active cyber defense discussion. If you have an offensive capability, what is the justified usage of it? And, most government capabilities in any field are developed by private actors and, through contracts, through whatever means. But that technology, that process, those tools, that talent still exist primarily in the private sector. And so if these tools exist, an ethical framework must be established for how to establish what is a good strike.
For particularly for colleagues, that are lawyers, more in the policy space, you hear a lot about confusion around how did we end up with cybersecurity being largely a responsibility of private actors. If you want to think about corollaries, if you own a physical facility, you have a bank, there's a long history of balancing the role for the private actor and the public sector actor to coordinate how to protect banks, for example.
100%.
You've got police, you've got
the Pinkertons,
back to
the day.
Whether it's carrying messages, those are all roles that you saw sort of a shared responsibility between a public and a private sector actor. But in the field of cyber, where we didn't see as much focus on cybersecurity from law enforcement and military and even the IC, that gap got filled in some ways by the private sector. And now, much of what's protectable is protectable because of private sector activity and investment. And that's a great thing. But at the same time, ethics and those sorts of dilemmas are usually best managed in the public law space. You have legislation, you have regulatory activity that helps to tease out what's the ethical boundaries for those sorts of things. And I think we're still in a state of flux around, how cybersecurity will essentially be maybe a different balancing in the future. And we see that with this active cyber defense bill, a clear role for a public sector actor to exert, their own authority and capability to protect. If we will, there are guys with badges and guns that show up if somebody tries to rob a bank. What's the ethical, if you will, the structure for that for cybersecurity? There's definitely models, across the globe for that. But, Japan can certainly learn from examples, in Europe and in the United States for sure.
The thing about these capabilities and the ability to, like you said, badges and guns knock on the door. Right now, that's usually a private consultancy. It may be a defend forward thing U.S. Cybercom does, but those are sort of far and few between. But the primary issue is that these capabilities still exist in private hands. So there has to be some sort of regulation, because if these incidents, like for example the cable cut incident or other cyber attacks or any type of things that involve computers happen and it involves a private actor, is that now a PMC of sorts? If you put these, where does the line exist for a cyber weapon, a cyber capability versus just, I pwned you?
Yeah, and private sector is a word, that we use a lot in English, particularly in the United States. In Japan, there's an expression, sangakukan, or industry, academia, and government. And we still have those, descriptions and all sorts of structures in the U.S. as well, and certainly across the globe. But the role of academia and the sort of, if you will, balance between industry versus, universities doing development involving cybersecurity, both weapons and defensive tools, is also, an area that Japan can learn from. I don't know, did you see the first known UEFI boot kit?
Yeah.
Boot Kitty, I think it was.
Yeah.
It came out of a South Korean university, I think.
That's a pretty wild capability, honestly. And, thankfully it was just a POC for research, but these types of things being open source and out there, I mean, even a decade or two ago, these types of capabilities were reserved for just, the top of the top, NSA, types of guys. But this is that's definitely something that, we have essentially a proliferation risk, and we have to figure out a way to be able to manage these capabilities. And this isn't a new conversation. I mean, Stuxnet was what, 15 years ago at this point when it was actually happening. I guess the story was a little after the fact, but these aren't new conversations, and there have been developments, there have been things along the way, the Talon Cyber Manual, for example. But as more and more countries sort of come into this new generation, this new paradigm of dealing with things, these questions have to be either adapted from previous answers or addressed uniquely for their position. And I think that's where Japan's at right now.
The government has been looking at the role of academic research in the evolution of cyber. The economic security bill that passed a couple years back does have some discussion about how that might play out for even patent applications, for example, and whether or not there was a quote secret patent that Japan should institute. In practice, if there's a patent application that has national security implications, there are usually mechanisms in patent reviews in the U.S. and Europe that will vet those concerns and give the opportunity for the government to, if you will, guide some of those patent applications. But another example of kind of where the oversight or those ethical dilemmas can play out in the public law space certainly offer some hopefully beneficial impacts for the society and the economy overall. If we're thinking about how Japan builds its cybersecurity workforce across not just academia, certainly people will increasingly have an opportunity to focus on cyber in universities. There's certainly work around that, and then whether it's in the public sector and you're working for a government entity or in the private sector, certainly there's a role for, if you will, the civilian cyber warrior. I think there's some interesting stuff in the Philippines that you and I were talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. There was I saw an article past week or so. Apparently, the Philippines is trying to recruit. They're calling civilian cyber warriors, but apparently there's a lot of hurdles to be able to get into this type of role. But essentially, they just want to get IT folks and cybersecurity people working in the private sector to come and help the police, the military, to sort of counter their hacker cyber threat, if you will. And this approach has many merits, but it also has the problems that a lot of these efforts have. Retention. You have the issues of compensation. You have to make sure you're identifying the right talent, and then a lot of times you'll have perfectly competent people, but because of the bureaucratic red tape that goes into these things, the best ones will slip through the cracks. And so this may or may not be a good thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of those topics came out in a recent call that the National Police Agency put out for a new role for agents that would retain their sort of private sector background and have like a limited role in investigations, but essentially a pipe between private sector IT folks being able to come into the National Police Agency and support active investigations. There were questions around, well, how do you vet people and understand what their capability and skill sets are? Compensation certainly has been a topic. I think the main point was that, wow, that's what they're going to pay. So yeah, you've got to be able to fund things also, and I think that's a critical
that's
problem.
Not a good wow, by the way.
Yes. If you're not familiar, if you're expecting a certain number, it's about 1/10 of that was basically the takeaway. And if you're a competent cybersecurity professional, you're in demand in most cases anywhere in the private sector. Most of the studies that have been focused on Japan's, if you will, skill gap for digital talent in general have looked at cybersecurity professionals in particular. I think the numbers I remember from an ACCJ McKenzie's paper that came out a couple of years back was that if, there's basically 1 in 10 IT professionals in the US that are cybersecurity focused, it's more like 1 in 100 in Japan. So, there's a pronounced gap of, just folks that are competent with cybersecurity technical problems. But at the same time, there's a skill gap on top of that in Japan. There's not enough IT professionals overall, and within that population, there's too few people that are today ready to go and defend Japan's homeland against cybersecurity threats.
To sort of address these gaps, a couple years ago, I started a little group called TenguSec here in Tokyo. And the idea was to bring together, cybersecurity and IT professionals and also train up the next generation, make things as freely available as we could, and then just sort of build a community around that. We've been very successful in that. And actually, just last month, we had our first conference, TenguCon. It was on November 13th. It was in Roppongi. It was a joint event between JIX and TenguSec, and we had, a great turnout. We had 116 people.
Yeah, it was super, super fun. It was, if you will, the first day of what a lot of people are calling Cybersecurity Week for Japan. It was the day before Code Blue started.
Code Blue, yep.
And a couple days before AV Tokyo on the weekend. And, there was a mix of, policy tracks, sort of panels and papers, a lot of really high quality paper submissions this year. I think we shared the same sort of challenge that, DEF CON and others have had, where there's just so much really great research out there. And when, there's, a new opportunity to share ideas and to, network and do the things that we're all excited about with these events, there's a lot of pent-up demand.
100%.
So that's a good thing. And I'm really excited. You've been great, in terms of leading the technical teams and trying to coordinate a little bit from the JIX side. In the same way, the topics around economic and national security and cyber, have a lot of venues. There's certainly a lot of really important engagements between governments and, folks that are rank and file, people in the private sector, a lot of colleagues of mine that are, in law firms that help businesses prepare and respond to, cybersecurity incidents, come together in different forms. But JIX, colleagues and I saw as an opportunity to try to pull those together and really give it a very clear cybersecurity focus. So I was excited, when we first started talking about the opportunity for TenguCon to really meet some of these, opportunities for people to network, but also very practical training opportunities and exchanging of substantive ideas, both on the policy but also on the technical side.
Absolutely, yeah. We had 3 different rooms, and I believe the total capacity for the rooms was 70. So we had people come and go throughout the day, but as we said, we had over 100 attendees, so we definitely hit capacity. But in addition to the policy track, we also had, the traditional InfoSec hacker track. We had some great speakers. We had Hari Hursti come and keynote on the policy side. We had Whitey Cracker, Bryce Case Jr., come and keynote on the InfoSec track. We also had a fantastic villages room. We had a malware village. We had a hardware hacking village. We had a physical security village. We had car hacking village. And there was so much demand and so much good feedback after that event that these villages were exactly what people were wanting, that we decided to give the people what they want, and we will be launching something starting next month called Tengu Underground. It will ideally be once or twice a month. It'll be a whole day event where you can just come, pay a small admission fee, and you can hack on whatever you want there. We'll have some food and drinks, and it will just be a good time. So keep an ear out for that.
Yeah, and I think we're all excited also for those events to be an opportunity for folks that aren't necessarily already, cybersecurity professionals, but are interested in the field and are looking for, if you will, mentoring and opportunities to help grow their skills and get, real good substantive feedback. And so if you're in the business sector, you've been managing maybe on the risk side, security related topics, but you're not real solid on some of the technical details. We want these events to also be approachable for folks at different skill levels. AI is such a broad, field. If you've looked at sort of the classical textbooks, a lot of the computer science curriculum will present here's how search functions work, and here's why graph and different sorts of data structures are better or less tuned for certain kinds of AI related problems. A whole field of optical and audio and other sorts of sensor related data. But a lot of I think the focus recently is around LLMs and generative AI, which are mostly text corpus. You're talking about large text sort of data sources, and then doing interesting AI related software work on it. Do more data science in focus really, but it's an example of stuff that we might be thinking about. Is like, well, there's definitely ways that AI will benefit cybersecurity defensive operations. But we're already seeing on the attack side people using AI in new ways to just create threats that weren't there before, or enhance the attack capability. It's an exciting sort of opportunity for AI to help people improve their cybersecurity work. But what was the web fuzzing or something around integrating an LLM so that you can generate fake identities?
Yeah. So there's a couple tools that have sort of come across my desk recently, and the first one comes from the bug bounty community. I mean, anybody who's done any sort of web hacking knows that the real juicy stuff is not going to be on the .com. It's going to be in some subdirectory of a subdirectory of a subdirectory. And the best way to find that currently is either just fuzzing with random strings or using these long, hopefully curated word lists. But this new tool called Brainstorm apparently combines a local LLM, so you don't have to rely on OpenAI or Claude or something, with FUF, FFUS. It's a a fuzzing tool that is a bit like a Dirbuster Dirsearch, but it really sort of opens the door to having way more efficient fuzzing to try to find these endpoints, because it will basically take in the website itself that you're looking at, and it will come up with possible paths, and it will hopefully be a lot more efficient at doing so. But that's probably a tool worth checking out. We'll drop a link for that repo in the description. Another tool, it's actually a couple years old, but I just thought it was really cool. It's called SOCU. We've had some good talks recently at some TenguSec events about building sock puppets, and usually if you want to have a good one, it is a long, detailed, involved process. But if for some reason you need a fake identity on the fly, this is a CLI utility where you can just bust out, a new identity, and you can have names, phone numbers, profile pictures, what have you, just with a one-liner in your command line. So,
if we could pause on this, one of the things that again back to like the use cases and like the ethics around these tools, so much of open source development is that sort of community, spirit, and like we're working together as a team, and everything, in a lot of cases starts with, well, what code have you contributed? What are you writing? But people's, digital identities online are also something that's used to, if you will, demonstrate your bona fides. And if, AI is making it much more difficult for, let's say a repo manager or somebody else to assess, is this person, a state actor? Is this somebody that's, really not aligned with the goals of our project? That's kind of concerning.
Another common issue is, when people don't put the right access controls in place. So we came across an article where apparently a security researcher was on either it was a bounty program or it might have just been some exploratory research, but they came across over 600,000 background check PDFs on an open share that was just available online, and they reported it. It was fixed, but I mean, these types of vulnerabilities, it's current year. These things shouldn't be happening.
I think it goes back to another point, that I was thinking about recently. Just the ability to automate basic misconfiguration problems is a huge value proposition for a cybersecurity defense focused team. Like, the DevOps evolution into SecDevOps. And if you're not familiar, just automating the process of building and deploying software and being able to utilize things that check things along the way is really really, really valuable. Just having that as an automated, ability to develop software and make sure it's not overly burdensome is certainly valuable. But here's an example where if you're opening a new port or you're deploying a new service on the internet, running it through an automated checker to see, do you have an open S3 bucket, for example, is just kind of default functionality. And I think a lot of the learning from the cloud side is just those sorts of, oh my gosh, I didn't think of that sort of problems. Putting those into packages that are templates, or if you will, sort of foundational sort of like building blocks for your application side are really valuable, because you can avoid a lot of those gotcha mistakes before they happen.
100%. And as automated tools become more and more prevalent, and DevSecOps pipelines and code quality checks and security checks become more and more the norm, hopefully things become a little easier to deal with. But for all the times that it doesn't, AWS has recently launched an incident response service. It combines their various logging tools in AWS with third-party tools, and it is primarily automated. But it's now a service they offer that, if something got breached, in our AWS and it was the thing you're having, then we can help you with the incident response as a service. And so it's an interesting twist on the shared responsibility model of security for cloud. But it's good to see that they are offering this type of capability. I think the industry is probably going to head in that direction going forward anyway.
Certainly, the field of that kind of automation, security automation in general, I think is going to have really important value for Japan for at least two reasons. One is, we were talking earlier about just the lack of qualified cybersecurity professionals. The more things that require a person to sit at a keyboard and actively engage on, the more risk you have, because if you're short on staff, you're going to cut. You're going to cut and you're going to deprioritize certain tasks. Everybody's familiar with notification fatigue, just as a general proposition. I'm excited, to see, the opportunity for more of these automation and, if you will, AI applications for stuff like this. Privacy enhancing technology is another example where, it's a little bit more focused on, if you will, the implications for, breaches, and then, what kind of information gets leaked. But being able to go into an environment, identify, where you see, social security numbers or other potential quasi-identifiers, things that people could use to, maybe identify an individual, for example. Finding those and then having automated mitigation strategies is, another example that, isn't directly in the scope of like log analysis and TI stuff, but that's the outcome, right? If you don't do a good job of de-identifying your data sets, and they are made available in a way that someone might be able to exploit or abuse them, that's a risk that you can also see being easier to manage in some sort of automated way.
This is our first episode of TenguCast, but we'd like to give a shout out to all the wonderful people around the world that have helped us become who we are today. Upcoming events that are worth checking out. B-Sides London is on December 14th, so if you're in the UK, definitely check it out. I hear it's a good time. Haven't made it myself. But there's actually another event later this month that is, I need to get out there sometime. It's in Hamburg, Germany, but Chaos Communication Conference. It is December 27th through 30th, and I hear it is a great time. No upcoming well-known CTFs, but of course there are various online CTFs available, and you can check them out on the CTF Time upcoming events page.
This is TenguCast.
So this morning in our Tokyo office, we heard a bit of a commotion overhead, and peeking our heads out the window, we saw some blacked out Blackhawks flying pretty low over us, and we were kind of wondering, okay, what's going on here? And then we turned on the news and we realized that, U.S. Space Force has now established a unit in Tokyo. And apparently they chose us as their flight path for where they want to conduct their sort of transport operations.
Yeah, if you live in Tokyo, you do hear traffic on occasion. There's certainly a lot of buildings downtown that flight paths across different residential and commercial neighborhoods. But I am really excited about the focus on space. I think for many of us, the role of space technology in both communications and ISR. I mean, so many really exciting synergies with cybersecurity in general. But I think it's been really great to see progress from the space policy community, including more cybersecurity discussions in most of the U.S.-Japan dialogues. Most discussion out of Washington on space policy today includes some discussion about the importance for cybersecurity and how do we secure information and share it more effectively, but also more securely. So I think it's cyber and its role and how space defense policy will evolve. Is going to be increasingly important and exciting. So it's great to see U.S. Space Force setting up their unit in Tokyo. I'm excited to interact with them, and we can certainly find some opportunities to talk a little bit more about other organizations across Tokyo that focus on space and security. JISS, for example, is a great organization that does a lot of more defense, but IC and other sorts of space policy discussions as well.
And and outside of the policy sort of government side of things, I mean, just the technical side of space security is super fascinating. I had the opportunity to go to Hack SpaceCon earlier this year down in Cape Canaveral. It was fantastic time. Absolutely recommend checking it out if you get a chance. I had a chance to meet Angelina Tsuboi, who is a fantastic researcher in the space vertical of hacking, if you will, and she's been putting out amazing content on space hacking. You want to hack satellites, you want to learn how to build a CubeSat, you want to learn all these things, she is the go-to. Highly recommend, check out her content. But, I mean, all this focus on space, I mean, so many people say Space Force, what did they do? I mean, it's to the point, there's even a show that's on Netflix, it's a comedy show. It's like, okay, what is the Space Force? Is it just bureaucracy? Is it just red tape? Another excuse to, hide things behind layers of classification? Or do they actually have some mission?
I think there's certainly plenty of room for people to have different views about what Space Force should focus on and, what the pacing and prioritization should be. But I think what I hear from colleagues and friends is that the formation of Space Force was a very positive thing for the space industry, for space policy. There are so many details in a modern IT system that touch satellite technology, that touch space, and not just that, but the whole domain of space and how it's likely to accelerate in terms of economic activity and everything else. Those are all topics that merit a more uniform sort of command, a more uniform approach. So I think what people see is, at least the opportunity, the valuable sort of like opportunity for Space Force to help coordinate space-related discussions and be, if you will, the single source of truth for things, a canonical source for where to go on details around the technology or other sorts of operational or other business-focused topics. I think that's a positive thing and seemed to make sense to me when friends explained it. With that also, I did watch Space Force on Netflix. I think it's only had one season though.
Yeah,
so hopefully we get to see more Space Force and then in season 2 find out what other crazy things happen. I don't know if you saw one episode where like Microsoft update starts and then they're trying to like avert the global catastrophe of a giant meteor crashing into the earth and they had to wait for Windows to update before they could use their system, so somebody brought out a slide rule. So who knows? Maybe I'm sure their IT is way better than that.
Absolutely, hopefully. I mean, I've heard good things, I guess, but space is cool. Have you been to space?
I've been to many spaces.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I have not yet been to outer space.
I haven't been to outer space.
Several countries have, and it is the nature of sort of geopolitical competition to have to account for the capabilities of not necessarily only adversaries but even friendly nations. And a lot of people view geopolitical machinations as a zero-sum game, and that's also why the United States feels that they need to have a robust space force to counter other countries. Because development and spending in the space.
The space. Well put, sir.
It has only increased over the years. And, there are so many different areas where, funding is what really brings things to the next generation. They say, the famous saying is, it wasn't rockets and, explosions that took people to the moon. It was funding. And so to that end, I saw a recent article that apparently U.S. subsidies towards AI development, specifically around LLMs and generative AI, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 billion.
Right.
But China is around $180 billion. That is almost a tenfold increase over the United States.
Yeah, it's more than 10, right? And, strategies, for countries to maintain competitiveness, are directly tied to funding sources. It's not so long ago that, a lot of U.S.-based technology firms were relocating research facilities in China because, in a lot of cases, if you're a new PhD in the United States, you might get a tenure offer to start teaching in a CS program, and you might get a couple PhDs guaranteed. Funding for PhDs is a big part of being able to build, your program. U.S. funding, usually I think we're maybe around 2 or so. It depends on the university, and certainly things have changed a lot lately. But at the same time, colleagues and friends were talking about, the why of relocating to China. It was money. And, ideas are important, but checks are also important. And if you're going to attract talent and retain it, you need to be able to think about how your business needs to grow so you can, keep and maintain your talent. It's certainly a part of that business strategy that, maybe Japan should focus a little bit more on. But maybe not a new topic, but for AI, yes, we need to think more strategically about how to fund research and development. But just generally, I think technology in the United States, engineering, we do need to focus, or at least return to discussions about how we invest in both people, but also in systems and programs. I would welcome more discussion, and I think the semiconductor sort of manufacturing focused investments on that side are a part of that sort of AI strategy, and certainly benefits for better AI funding are something we've already talked about today on the cybersecurity side.
I've heard a couple different quotes recently that really sort of emphasize this in a nutshell. I believe it was a former leader of the Solomon Islands, who the U.S. and China were basically courting to try to gain geopolitical favor. And the quote was essentially, Americans come with big ideas, China comes with big checks. And that really sort of explains, that when you're competing against ideas are great, but execution is what matters the most, because you can talk in circles all day, but if you don't actually produce anything, there's not actually follow through, nothing can happen. And, things do take time, but another quote that I recently heard is that in the U.S., things are moving at the speed of politics. In China, things are moving at the speed of commerce.
Certainly agree strongly that we should be funding more basic science research, more engineering, more R&D. At the same time, I think the commerce point is worth pausing on. Coming together and developing a strategy that helps to grow everyone's economy, sort of the win-win scenarios, and the history around why free trade is important are not just about writing an initial check. There's plenty of programs that say the World Bank or IMF or other international institutions try to get the ball rolling on, and certainly initial funding is an important part of that, but being able to get momentum, develop, if you will, that commercial inertia, isn't just the initial funding. It's also being able to integrate into, the global economic, if you will, sphere. And so, one thing that I think I do have, an interest in seeing how it will evolve, and personally have a lot more, background thinking about the role of free trade and the importance of it. But fair trade, onshoring, the development of, if we will, like-minded models for technology and economic sort of cooperation are absolutely here to stay. And, a lot of folks have talked about how the economy is changing, that in, say the last, 20 years or 30 years, which coincidentally coincide with a lack of economic growth in Japan, were, if you will, more a topic about the role of China's economy and how it was growing. And the admission of China into the global trading network and, their ascension as a WTO member really changed the role of free trade and, if you will, that technology policy piece in pretty profound ways. There used to be sort of a carrot and a stick discussion, and certainly, the check discussion you talked about earlier was not just about let's make a new program or let's help fund things. It's also about, like I was saying, how to integrate those economies into the global economic sort of cooperative framework, if you will, in ways that also ensure that people are making good progress to protect and enforce human rights, that we're, encouraging, peaceful mechanisms that, would help improve, internal conflict resolution, mechanisms that would improve the rule of law. Those are all also part of the discussion. And so we don't want to necessarily take AI or space or other cybersecurity topics and ignore the fact that there are really serious implications for people, and that goes back to that ethical discussion. How are we going to help economies grow and cooperate better and do the sorts of things that I think former Prime Minister Abe talked about with data free flows with trust, and build that economic, if you will, sort of cooperation in ways that also preserve human rights and, respect for the free and open internet, and a fundamental sort of respect for commercial sort of relationships and honoring your contract obligations, kind of basic skills. My view is still that, if you are a rule of law nation and everybody has, things that don't always meet muster, but if there's mechanisms within that country that are, due process focused, that help to resolve conflicts peacefully and in a predictable way, those are still really important things that are related and not always part of that, technical focus of discussion.
So, folks who don't have anything to eat will be tempted to reach for a poisoned apple. But, there's a lot that can be done around that with offering clear pathways to go from, a bad state to a very good state, rather than just all at once, here's the money, you're on your own, kind of figure it out situation. Sort of like what's been happening with the Belt and Road initiatives in Africa with these high interest loans, and when they default, the property returns to the Chinese, essentially. There needs to be processes and there needs to be programs to be able to help not just nations but individuals find their way in this new order. And that's something that we're trying to aim to accomplish with the training piece, and with getting the word out, helping people realize what's going on in the world around them, while also learning valuable skills.
TenguCast is brought to you by TenguSec and James.
All this talk, there's a lot of doom and gloom. AI has, been mentioned a lot today, but it's not all doom and gloom. So, Japan, we mentioned their economic ascension, and Japan is definitely having a tourism boom right now. But there's parts of Japan that are not as equally visited, and in order to make it more appealing, they figured that they would use the new hotness that are LLMs to generate some websites about lesser known sites.
Oh, is this? I think what you're talking about is the AI generated, essentially like fake tourist spots.
Oh, you spoiled it. Yeah.
In Fukuoka. Well, I don't know. It's funny in sort of a Japanese kind of way, but it does demonstrate sort of the risks of AI generated content. I think if I remember the discussion correctly, there were some website operators that created AI-generated websites for places that don't exist.
Yes. For example, Uminaka Happiness Land is apparent. There's a whole beautiful promotional package for this wonderful place that is not on this planet anywhere.
Well, I think you and I both agree that there are so many really great places in Japan that actually do exist.
Indeed.
And certainly a lot of places that are not, as accessible on the internet. But certainly AI and the ability to, create new content and, massage it. There's plenty of, sites that are, using AI generation tools in different ways. I don't think we need to create imaginary places, although Japan is in some ways almost this imaginary land of cool. So for many of us that really love Japan, sometimes we think it might be AI generated. How awesome it is!
It's it's true. That's true. And there are so many awesome places to go, awesome things to attend. For example, just on the first Friday of each month, we through TenguSec host the 2600 magazine monthly meeting. It is at B-Mars in Shinjuku in Tokyo, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. first Friday of every month. So please come through, try to check that out. And then as we get Tengu Underground events off the ground, please feel free to come. And if you're not local in Tokyo, that's totally fine. Feel free to stop in, reach out to us on any of our social medias. And we are happy to communicate, share information, and just start a conversation with you. And this sort of wraps up our first conversation with this audience. I hope you had a good time. I certainly did.
I had a great time, and I think we're all looking forward to talking about cybersecurity and some of the things that are happening in Japan that you might not be aware of. Today we talked about imaginary websites that you've never heard of because they don't exist. But there's a lot of excitement in Japan right now. I think in having followed Japan for most of my life, a lot of people feel that Japan is at an inflection point, that there's a lot of momentum. Certainly we've seen, the discussions around cybersecurity really start to mature over the last particularly 2-3 years. So we welcome you guys to come back. We'll have our podcast schedule, I guess, posted pretty quickly, but you'll certainly be able to see more episodes coming online in the next couple of weeks.
Very, very soon, coming to a provider of fine podcasts near you. So this has been TenguCast. I am Cicada.
And I'm James Miller.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
This is TenguCast.